The internally displaced Palestinians are returning to their homes, which have been decimated by the Zionist entity over the past 15 months. Phase 1 of a ceasefire officially kicks in on Sunday, and aid will soon be allowed into the enclave. Hospitals will receive much needed resources. All of this is to help the millions of Palestinians who had faced starvation, injury and psychological trauma. We'll be discussing how it will take decades to recover from these attacks by the Zionist entity on Gaza's natural resources and obviously also on the health system. Our guest this morning is Dr. Vanessa Farr. She is a Senior Research Fellow at Sheffield Hallam University's Helena Kennedy Center for International Justice. She worked with Palestinian gender activists and researcher Hanan Kaoud and looking at the severe consequences of military toxins, believe it or not, malnutrition obviously, and also the environmental destruction on Gaza's population. Then we will also be talking to Professor Hassan Muhammad, a member of the Healthcare Workers for Palestine, and also on the panel today would be Laith Hanbali. He is a physician and researcher working on community and public health in Palestine. Let's see if we got everybody on board. Let's start with Dr. Vanessa Farr. Good morning to you, Dr. Vanessa.
Good morning. Good morning, and good morning to all the listeners. Thank you so much for hosting this important conversation on at such a momentous time.
Absolutely.
The next few days are so important.
Momentous indeed. Thank you for your time too, Dr. Farr. Professor Hassan Muhammad, member of the Healthcare for Workers for Palestine. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, and good morning to you and to the listeners and to the fellow guests. Thank you for inviting me.
Shukran for you and your time. And then finally, Laith Hanbali, a physician and researcher working on community and public health in Palestine. Welcome.
Thank you so much for welcoming me here, and good morning to you and good morning to the other guests and listeners.
All right. Maybe if we could stick to the order for now. Dr. Farr, can you explain the concept of slow violence and how it applies to the environmental impact of the occupation in Palestine?
Yes, indeed. Slow violence is a concept initiated by a South African academic called Rob Nixon, who now lives and works in the US. And what he talks about, particularly in the context of extreme military violence, is the fact that even though what we sort of see on our screens or read about is this kind of spectacularity of these bombs going off and people immediately dying, the terrifying and the very, very difficult aspect of military warfare is the fact that it is so toxic. The poisons are so extreme that people will die from the effects of exposure to those poisons for many, many decades to come. And in fact, we now know from studies conducted of survivors of the European Second War that these effects can be epigenetic, meaning that they get passed on through the uterine environment, or from the sperm of the father and the ova of the mother into the child, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. So especially we actually cannot fathom, we can't figure out how toxic this violation of the last nearly 16 months in Gaza has been. It is so spectacularly toxic. Not only all the blowing up of all the buildings has released asbestos, but there's white phosphorus everywhere. There are unknown cocktails of toxins where the Israelis have, with the American and German support, of course, and UK support in building these munitions in the first place, they keep putting together more and more improbable combinations of things that will kill and maim and wound and injure and penetrate deep into the soil. So everything is destroyed, but the problem is it may be destroyed for beyond the decade or so, they're saying, of the actual rebuilding of Gaza. People's bodies are going to be bearing the price of this for many, many generations to come. Already there are babies, many babies have been born in the last few months in Gaza that are showing signs of malformation, as a result of exposure in utero to toxicity. So it's a terrifying and very, very long recovery that will need to be take place. And there's another wonderful academic who says pollution is colonialism. I think that probably resonates quite strongly for people living in Cape Town, because we live in the long aftermath of apartheid and its multiple cruelties, many of which are environmental. So we know what that means.
From your description, Vanessa, it looks like in the aftermath of the atomic bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the kind of long-lasting impact that these have had. Am I correct in saying that then?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. This issue of epigenetics, which is how the trauma of this generation continues to travel through multiple generations. These are visible, around us. Actually, if you look in Cape Town, you see lots of examples. For instance, people's bodies are very inflamed. We would call it obesity or overweight, but actually, it's a sign of inflammation. It's a sign of exposure to environmental toxins that bodies can't manage, they can't deal with. Our human bodies are very finely tuned instruments, created perfectly by God, as we know. And when we disrupt all of these very fine little systems in the body, the endocrine system, our digestive systems, our hormonal systems, whenever these get thrown off track by pollution from plastics, pollution from there's all sorts of environmental toxicity. It makes people really sick. And yes, as you say, after a war, those effects are felt for multiple generations. Frightening.
Let's move to Laith and Professor Mohammed. Perhaps, Laith, if you could maybe just give us some idea of the attacks on hospitals and medical facilities impacted the overall healthcare system, and how serious now, standing on the outside, is this in fact?
Yes, of course. The first thing to say about this is that the targeting, the destruction, the dismantling of the health sector, and that includes all of the things that Dr. Farr mentioned about baking in illness and injury and ill health for generations to come, on the one hand, and the destruction of the infrastructure that would need to support people in order to become well and in order to treat them, on the other. The dismantling of those structures has been a central strategy of the genocide that the Israeli occupation forces have carried out in Gaza for about 480 days. So the destruction of hospitals has left not a single hospital in Gaza fully functioning exactly as it was designed to do. Now, the World Health Organization says something like, it needs 7 years and $10 billion to rebuild, but it's really the combination of things that Dr. Farr mentioned, alongside the fact that over 1,000 healthcare workers have been killed over the course of the 480 days. There are still many who remain incarcerated, about 200 of them, and there is also severe destruction that has been handed down on hospitals. So we recently saw that, most recently, in Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, which, after being bombed multiple times over several weeks and months, and after being evacuated of all of its staff, the Israeli military actually then went in and destroyed equipment. It destroyed generators of oxygen, and they also stole electric generators, and they burned several of the units. That's after it was completely non-functional, completely empty of people and equipment. And that really speaks to the aim to not just kill Gazans in the present, but to also try to kill any possibility of a future for the Gazan people and for the Gazan healthcare system. So that has been pretty much the central strategy of the Israeli military. That's why this genocidal campaign is distinct from any other violence that Israel has inflicted, because it's going that far in trying to destroy the future.
Thank you, Laith Hanbali. Professor Hassan Muhammad, the impact that these attacks have had on the civilian population, and particularly, I know that the healthcare workers of Palestine has been at the forefront of highlighting these issues, but the impact on particularly women and children. I mean, to start gauging the kind of, not only the physical kind of destruction of human beings, but also the kind of mental and spiritual destruction. Not so, Professor Muhammad?
Absolutely. And again, as we know, one of the elements of the Genocide Convention, refers to, attacks or destruction of the ability of a population to reproduce and to continue. And this is where your question is quite pertinent. Access to maternal care, which is a basic right, the conditions under which births occur, a very vulnerable period. And as we've seen very tragically that, young babies who are extremely vulnerable have died of hypothermia, just died of the cold. And, when last I checked, it was about 8 babies. But, several hundred have been admitted to hospital, suffering from hypothermia. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Women, in terms of the type of health care that they need, have not been able to access it. I've mentioned maternal services, these have been destroyed as the health system has been destroyed. So these basic services, which, are really around the world taken for granted, that should be there as a right, are just simply not available. So this has had a devastating effect, again, beyond the physical destruction of the bombing, the genocidal attacks by the Israeli armies. Of course, we know that, between 50 and 70% of the victims of the bombing campaign, of the killing campaign, have been women and children. So they've paid extremely high cost. Again, just another indication of the genocidal intent with which this war was conducted, or this genocide was conducted. So I think we are again extremely disturbed by this. We hope that there will be accountability, but of course, as we move forward, these are absolutely crucial services that need to be rebuilt, and as part of re-establishing the health of the Palestinian community in Gaza. Certainly both women or maternal and child health services absolutely should take priority, as part of the reconstruction efforts. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If you've joined us late, you're listening to a conversation with Dr. Vanessa Farr, Professor Hassan Muhammad, and Laith Hanbali. Dr. Farr, what are some of the specific ways in which Israel's military actions have targeted and damaged Gaza's water resources, for example? And we talked earlier on about the long-term effects. I mean, what would the effect now be, given that that hopefully the Parliament their Parliament would ratify the agreement today, tomorrow? The water resources has been a major, the target of this illegal occupation. What are the long-term effects thereof?
Yeah, so water is a really, really big question in the military occupation of Palestine. Firstly, just to give you a big picture, The state of Israel, while it sells itself as being this remarkable entity that makes the desert bloom, I'm sure you've heard that story before, and sells, things like desalination plants and irrigation systems and so forth all over the world as if it was some kind of incredible magical expert. Again, warning for Cape Town citizens, watch carefully where all of this water salination technology is coming from. We need to track and make sure that we're not being conned into buying things from Zionists, because they've done a very good job, PR job around the world of selling themselves as water technologists. What they've really done, in reality, what they've done is they've stolen all the water resources from the region. So I want people to pay very careful attention to the fact that the Israelis have now claimed that Mount Hermon, or the Golan, the full Golan Heights, belongs to them. They used the opportunity of the fall of Assad to take more land, and they've taken the watershed. So they've taken the area that supplies the sacred river of Jordan. In Gaza itself, they began to collapse the coastal aquifer. Again, something very familiar to Cape Townians, how precious coastal aquifers are, how sensitive they are to saline water intrusion. So if you pull out too much water, they'll fill up with salt water, and then the sweet water is gone and you can't use it for irrigation or any other purpose. So Gaza has suffered ever since the siege began in 2006. The aquifer began to collapse in 2007. So they've destroyed this ancient water supply, so ancient that it was written about in Egyptian texts of 3,000 years ago. And in fact, the reason that Gaza is so crowded today is because in the first Nakba of 48, that's where refugees stopped. They stopped in Gaza because of its sweet water. So that's gone. There's a very precious wadi, there's a very precious wetlands, very important for migratory waterfowl, whose condition we don't know. Because in addition to what Laith is saying about the full and vicious destruction of the healthcare system, every aspect of Gaza's research capacities has been destroyed. So we now need to urgently get in and do things like soil testing and water testing to try to find out what the toxicity effects are and whether the water can ever be restored. I mean, these are questions to which we don't have answers. But the impossibility of doing this work now that all research capacities have been destroyed. I'm part of a group that works on Gaza food systems called Gaza Regenerated. And one of our real concerns is to keep the Baladi farming systems in place, which is indigenous farming methods that go back thousands of years, that have been carefully developed by Palestinians through observation and science done with the soils and the land of where they work. That now risk being replaced by big technologicalized agricultural systems that cannot work in that very sensitive ecosphere. So there's a tremendous amount around water that we need to watch very carefully, including things like the wholesale destruction of Gaza's desalination plants. Its water systems have been destroyed, although amazingly Gaza's engineers have been preparing as they get blown up. But we do need to watch Israel's ambitions to take everybody else's water. That's also partly what the incursions into South Lebanon are about. I hope everyone's been attending to the fact that everything is heading up to the Latanya River because they want to control the water. And as a water controlling entity in a region that apart from its coastal areas where Gaza is, which is why they want it, is not that fertile, although it's in the Fertile Crescent. It's also part of the world that's heating most quickly. And as observant listeners will know, we passed the 1.5 degree heating threshold mark in 2024. So it's very, very hot and very dry, and water is exceedingly precious. And those water wars of the future that we've all been warned about, they're not in the future, my friends, they are now. This is a water war. In a very important way, this is also a war for the settler colony of Israel to control all the water sources. So we need to pay attention, because these kinds of problems, these kinds of approaches, this kind of violent settler governance, this kind of thieving is becoming a kind of governance model that other nations are willing to pursue as well. And so these are all warnings for all of us. This ecocidal violence cannot be contained to a single place, because all of the Earth's systems are connected. And what it takes place in one place is going to take place in another. And we are all breathing in the toxicity of the air of Gaza right now because these systems move around the world. So it's, ecocide it always sounds like something that we're doing to the environment, but we are the environment, right? I mean, what are our bodies made of? Exactly the same things. We're made of water. We're made of the same substances as soil. When those are polluted and endangered and toxified, so are our bodies. And this is why everybody is so sick now around the world.
Incredibly serious situation from what Dr. Vanessa Vaz is referring to. Thank you for that. Laith Hambali, perhaps this really, I mean, the destruction of health care facilities obviously affected medical professionals who provide care in Gaza. What is the kind of strategy do you think is going to need to be applied? I mean, given the fact that everything from what we now understand has been destroyed, and after being destroyed, they've used this bunker-busting bombs to create, almost bury these facilities into the ground. What do you see going forward? I mean, besides the fact that the Zionist entity controls access to these spaces now, and I mean, there's now a requirement that the journalists be allowed as soon as possible to record all of these the impacts of their activities over the last 480 days. How do you see going forward that that the medical professionals would actually be able to provide care in Gaza, given the situation that we find ourselves in now?
That's obviously the question of the day, of the week, and it's extremely challenging. The most important thing to bear in mind is that despite all of the destruction, the Gazan health workforce, and always led by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, has time and again been able to rehabilitate hospitals that we thought were beyond repair, beyond any potential use, and actually then made use of them. So a Shifa hospital, which was incinerated, is managing to treat patients. It manages to, it's got an emergency department, and it's able to have some inpatients as well as some outpatient care. And that's after being incinerated. And so the first thing to always bear in mind is that the Gazan health workforce needs to be at the forefront of any plans for rebuilding and for rehabilitating the health sector and the entirety of Gaza, of course. One, because they have shown absolute capability to do that, even through the current genocide, and also from previous experience. The second is that they're the ones, because journalists and international aid workers and etc. have not been allowed in. Journalists not at all, and international aid workers in very, very, very limited numbers and with very tight restrictions. It's the Gazan professionals themselves in the health workforce who actually understand the extent of the damage that's been created, and so they're the ones that can really lead, just with the knowledge that they have, just on a purely practical basis. So that's the first thing. The second thing is making sure that now that the ceasefire has been agreed and it's there for the world to see, that the pressure is on now to make sure that there are not the kinds of restrictions that the Israeli forces always try to inflict on the entry of goods and services and personnel. So obviously there's going to be a need for building equipment and building materials, as well as huge numbers of medical supplies and medical equipment and devices, etc., to try to kind of get things back on track. There is absolutely no doubt that it will be part of it. Is we know that it's part of the agreement that those things are allowed in, but Israel always tries to work around those, and so continuing public pressure, continuing resistance on a global level to the Israeli regime's attempts to kill Palestinians, even through siege, even without firing a single shot, it will remain important. That public pressure will remain important. And for those who are able, it's really important, finally, the third kind of arm of this is those professionals on a global level who are able to support the Gazan health workforce in their efforts to rebuild and rehabilitate should absolutely exercise that now. So acting in solidarity with their Gazan colleagues, whether it's at home by hosting treatment and hosting people in order to treat them in their home countries and then sending them back to Gaza when they have been treated, or going over to Gaza and providing that support if they are able to, and going and helping also rebuild the experience and expertise that's needed. Because, as I said, over 1,000 of the Gazan health workforce have been killed. And that includes actually some of the top specialists in their fields. And so it's very important to then also think about how to retrain and how to rehabilitate the workforce as well. So those would be the three arms that people need to be thinking about, and thinking about what their role is in making sure that happens, on an individual level as well as on a collective level.
Thank you for that, Laith Hambali. Professor Muhammad, as South African healthcare workers for Palestine, do we have a kind of strategic plan in place to see what it is that we could be doing to assist going forward? Is there some methodology that's been designed that could be applied?
Yeah, so I think through our networks, I think one of the things that we have been involved in is supporting medical students from Gaza who've come to South Africa, and I mean, as we know, all the universities in Gaza have been destroyed. So in order for them to continue their education, to complete, and then to go back to support the health system in Gaza. So that's one of the initiatives that we've been involved in. But we are also involved in, supporting organizations like Gift of the Givers, who provide direct support, humanitarian support in Gaza. So I think those are two areas. But I think we certainly need to explore various other aspects, not just the training of medical students, but there has been a call from academics in Gaza to ask us to see if we can, provide support in terms of online courses for students who are now unable to complete their education through the university system in Gaza. So that's another potential role that we could play. And then, of course, in terms of, people actually going to Gaza, again, depends on who has the means and ability to do that. But we would work through organizations like Gift of the Givers, who have already an infrastructure in place, who have links with communities in Gaza. And we would, if whatever call there is to provide support to the health system there, we would direct through existing organizations that do have links in that area. If you don't mind, if I can just add to what Laith has said in terms of reconstruction, I think we need to keep in mind that health is not just about the health system. It's also about, from a public health point of view, as Vanessa's mentioned, access to clean water. It's about access to healthy, clean food, things we take for granted. But since those systems have been destroyed in Gaza, and then shelter. Again, people suffering from hypothermia during winter or from heat stroke in summer. Just proper shelter, basic things are needed. And then support infrastructure around roads, power supply, sewage disposal. All of those are also needed for an effective system to optimize health and also to support the health system. In terms of the the health system itself. We need obviously effective governance system, and as Laith um, has mentioned, a lot depends on, you know, um, how much power, how much of the organizing ability and governance of this process once the ceasefire is implemented is going to be controlled by the Palestinians, because that's absolutely crucial in terms of being able to effectively set up, um, you know, the health system and then the health workforce. Again, let's refer to that. How do we re-establish them? Not just bringing people in, but also re-establishing the training mechanisms for health workers in Palestine. All of those are going to be absolutely crucial to, effectively re-establish the health system there. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Muhammad. If you've joined us late, we're having a conversation with Dr. Vanessa Farr, Professor Hassan Muhammad, and Laith Hanbali on the issue of finding ways and means of, restoring the health systems in Palestine, in Gaza, obviously in particular. Vanessa, in many ways, one of the things, and you referred to that earlier on, Israel has used agricultural toxins, in the same way that Agent Orange was used. For example, was it in Vietnam during the Vietnam War to destroy as much of the greenery and growth, that would support those populations at the time. To what extent would this impact on food security, food sovereignty, and agricultural livelihoods? Because we know that many Palestinians were excellent farmers, and you referred to the age-old methodologies that had been used and it's now been destroyed.
Yeah, this is a really big one. So I'm not so sure that they use things like napalm. Remember that there was a particular condition under which the Vietnamese War was fought, which was that there was a very dense canopy of trees that the Americans tried to destroy so that they could see the enemy below. But what the Israelis have attempted to do in the last 15 months is reshape the geography of the Strip. So they've imposed, for instance, the Philadelphia corridor in the south and Netzarim corridor in the middle. And those were the two sort of sticking points in the attempted ceasefire of I think it was May last year, the same one that we're seeing now, the same language. But the whole point was that they did not want to give back those two swathes of land because it was going to enable them to effectively occupy the northern parts of the Strip. And that is where a lot of the agriculture took place. I mean, there was agriculture around the Strip itself. And people were, in fact, moving seeds up and down. I don't know whether people are aware that despite the horror that's been happening, Gazans have managed to continue to plant and grow food. And before this, before the 7th of October, Gaza was relatively, I think it was actually almost entirely food sufficient in fresh salads and fruits. And so one of the things the Israelis have done is they've banned the importation into the Strip of any kind of stone fruits. So, peaches, etc., that you could replant, where you could eat the fruits and plant the seed. I mean, that's how extreme this ecocide really is. But most importantly, there is a tussle going on, and this will go on, and it speaks entirely to what Professor Mohammed and Mr. Hanbali were saying about Palestinians being allowed to control this reconstruction. It's their right to reconstruct as they wish to. There's been a tussle going on for the last few years between those who wish to impose these kind of so-called modern agricultural, agro-industrial systems that use toxins and use genetically modified seed and the same sort of rubbish that we have to deal with in South Africa. And the Baladi farmers, the farmers who are indigenous agroecological farmers who know how to work with the land and who have been breeding livestock and seeds over generations that are perfectly adapted to Gaza's conditions. Now, we are almost certain in the Gaza Regenerated Group, we're almost certain that there will be efforts now to try to take away bloody farming altogether, and there will be arguments made that food security requires more, these more intensive monocropped, poison-fed food systems. So that's another thing that has to be safeguarded, is the ancient knowledge and the right to clean food grown in healthy soils. So there's a tremendous amount of work that's going to have to be done there. Fortunately for us, the University of Bethlehem, under the incredible leadership of Dr. Mazen, has some seed banks that that of course have survived because they're in Bethlehem. Gaza's own seed banks have been destroyed. Many of the knowledge keepers have been destroyed, have been martyred in this war. Large swathes of the Strip have been denuded of everything. We've been speculating on whether it's possible perhaps to use human manure, which is, as you might imagine, human excrement. We could possibly dry this out and create something called biochar, which is a kind of natural supplement that could be put into the soil, because we really, honestly, the soil health will have been destroyed. It will be so toxic, and all of those delicate little systems that operate in healthy soils will have been destroyed. And so just really trying to think very carefully about how to not allow Gaza to be now recolonized from a completely different perspective, which will be that of taking away these beautiful ancient systems that maintain the health of the Strip as a living landscape to which people's lives are dedicated. So yeah, there's an extraordinarily big task ahead of us there as well, to support and save what Palestinians know, how they want to farm, the seeds that they've managed to save, the ideas that they've got about perhaps where urban gardening could be set up in the reconstruction. How would one rebuild a green Gaza without it being turned into sloganeering and the kind of false solutions that capitalism is so fond of. Yeah, so there's a lot of work there.
It seems that it looks bleak, but with the kind of positivity.
Exciting though.
Yeah.
It's exciting. The thing is, many people are saying Palestinians have not lost. Palestinians have won again. The Sumud has won again, and the pain that now begins should be the pain of Israel.
Yes.
It is Israelis who should be feeling.
If there's one thing,
should be feeling frightened of what they have to.
If there's one thing we cannot knock, is the resilience of the Palestinian people. It's an example for the rest of the world. Despite this was going to be an easy walk in the park. Within 2 weeks, we'll destroy Gaza and we'll capture the whole Strip and do what we have to do. And it hasn't happened.
But they love the land.
Exactly.
They love the land.
Absolutely. And the resilience has been incredible. It's a conversation that everybody has around their dinner tables everywhere in the world, I suppose. And I think that should indicate the fact that the Israelis clearly have lost this war. They believed in themselves that they could do what they wanted to do. It hasn't happened, but that's another conversation. The long-term consequences of the collapse itself for the Palestinian population, the collapse of the health care system. Do you see agencies, and Vanessa refers to kind of reimposition of the kind of colonial mindset, we shall now decide for you what's best for you type of approach. What should be done, do you think, or is going to be done, hopefully, to make sure that the Palestinians have the right to decide how and when they would do what they need to do to survive, going forward?
Yeah, even during the genocide itself, we already saw what international organizations and foreign governments would always try. Okay, so that colonial mindset, the coloniality of the international aid system, of healthcare itself. The healthcare industry is one that is generally around the world massively beholden to private profit and private profit interests, and that whether that's through the pharmaceutical industry or even the tobacco industry funding a lot of research. It's really it's a massively colonized field in general. And so there is going to be that challenge. There is already that challenge. We saw international organizations and foreign governments setting up field hospitals that weren't even trying to coordinate with any of the local communities or the Ministry of Health or the local organizations that have been providing health services in Gaza for decades. But in the end, actually, through the strength of the Palestinian health workforce and the strength of people who weren't willing to accept that colonial mindset being inserted into the delivery of health services, actually, even those field hospitals in the end had to coordinate with the Gazan Ministry of Health, the Palestinian Ministry of Health. And so it is a struggle. It's one that the Gazans are actually very used to dealing with, because that's exactly what they've been having to deal with for decades, particularly actually since the siege was imposed, because the siege then reduced the number of options for how Gazans are able to receive international aid. And so actually Gazans are much more alert, I think, I would even say, than the rest of Palestinians about how to navigate that minefield of the coloniality of the international aid system and of the healthcare profession and healthcare organizations. So it's going to be a struggle, and that's why it becomes really important to do the things that we've been talking about, whether it's with agriculture, as Vanessa was talking about, or with the health workforce, as Hassan was mentioning. That is really where the struggle has to be, and that's why we have to act in solidarity. These kind of humanitarian principles that talk about neutrality and completely decontextualize, oppression from the capitalist and imperialist interests that drive the suffering and the oppression. We really need to kind of move away from, because they don't address the core issues, the issues at a deep level, and that's why acting in solidarity needs to be the central theme of how we try to deal with the Gaza health system, and preventing organizations from imposing those kind of neutrality principles and these colonial interests and imperial interests and capitalist interests in the assistance to Gaza in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Laith. Your concluding remarks, Professor Hassan Mohammed.
Yes, thanks. And I think just to build on what Laith said, and Vanessa, is, we have all these wonderful laws, international laws, codes, ethics, but we can see how easily these are dismissed and thrown away. I think we, should, and I, want to appeal to everyone listening, is that we all need to be activists. We all need to show solidarity and apply pressure. It's not enough just to have those rules in place. We need to ensure that those laws, those rules, are effectively applied. Lastly, I just want to pay tribute to the health workers, specifically, symbolized by Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who's an icon representing the health workers of Gaza and their strength and resilience. But not just him, but all health workers have worked under the most horrific conditions, imaginable. And, to continue to do that work under threat of being killed, under, the lowest resource conditions, having to do operations by cell phone light, not having anesthetics, etc. One wouldn't want to wish that on anyone. But they stood their ground. They stood by the patients and upheld, the highest ethical standards. And I think just for that, we should remember them as heroes and keep that example as something that all of us, around the world can follow. Thanks.
That was Professor Hassan Mohammed. Your concluding remarks, Dr. Vanessa Farr.
Oh, it's difficult to say anything after Professor Mohammed's beautiful words. I'm quite tearful. Thank you for that. This is exactly it, right? We are really at a watershed in the world now. This ecocide in Gaza is part of why the earth is heated. This is 100 years of 400 years, 500 years of horrifying capitalist, patriarchal, anti-life violence, and we have got to, as humans, make this come to a stop. We cannot live here on this beautiful, precious, delicate planet with this level of violence being permitted, being encouraged, with this kind of technologization of cruelty. It cannot happen like this. We're all of the same body. We all feel one another's pain. It may, we are all now facing the problem of this Zionist fascist entity that is leading so many off the path of righteousness, away from ethical well-being, away from kindness, towards this kind of right-wing horror that we're seeing streaming around all over the world. And we have to make it stop. Those who have been ethical, precisely as Professor Mohammed said, are those brave doctors and nurses and pediatricians and health aides and you name it, anybody who has done anything to heal in the last 16 months, whether that's planting a seed or taking care of the dogs and cats of Gaza, which people are doing as well at the same time. Everybody who has shown what it is to lean towards light, to lean towards life, those are the people we should emulate. We're at a cliff edge, a total cliff edge as humanity. And Palestinians have once again, with their sumud and their ethics and the way they lift their hands to God and say, your will be done. I mean, what more leadership can we ever have imagined from a people, tiny, tiny children saying, Alhamdulillah, I'm in the hands of God. I'm here because this is the will of God. This is mind-blowing, really, when you think about that degree of patience, that degree of sumud, that degree of faith that one day the rest of the world will be in that place of elevated ethical knowledge that Palestinians miraculously have arrived at. And we must be faithful to their example. We must be faithful to all those who have been martyred. And we must remember that it's from earth that we come, and to earth we will return. And we must take care of this precious earth of ours.
This incredibly powerful comments from Dr. Vanessa Farr. Unfortunately, we have to conclude today's session, and I think it's been a privilege listening to Dr. Vanessa Farr, Professor Hassan Mohammed, and to Laith Hanbali on a very, very important topic. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Shukran.
Thank you very much for having us. Shukran.
Thank you so much.
Difficult conversation, but the conversation that needed to be had. I think it's important that we all understand the complexities. I mean, whilst there's a big hurrah about the fact that, there's going to be some kind of freedom for the Palestinians, with the proposed siege being lifted on the Gazans. But it's from what we've just heard now, there's a lot of work that's going to be happening, and unfortunately, it's not just simply about bricks and mortar being shipped into Gaza and rebuilding. The destruction that we have noticed over the last almost 500 days. But more importantly, I mean, there's long-lasting impact that we've now understood or been made to understand that the Gazans are facing, and then the world really, as in the way that Vanessa's now put it, it's it's time that this kind of technological violence that's been visited upon peoples, not only in Gaza, in Palestine, but across the world. And in many people would argue that capitalism actually is institutionalized violence, against humanity. And the sooner we start realizing that we need to step back, reassess, who we are as human beings, what it is that we are here for, and make sure that going forward, we change our ways of doing and dealing with people, with things that surround us, and find a commonality that's human, that has kindness attached to it, that's believing in many ways that there's an Almighty that we have to answer to, etc., etc. And hopefully, we'll get there soon, inshallah.